Hello everyone, this is Greg from Indie Drop-In. Before we get started with another amazing true crime creator, I wanted to tell you about my podcast, Fan Dummies. Every week, Aaron and I talk about our favorite superhero, science fiction, and fantasy TV and movies. So if you like shows like WandaVision, Resident Alien, Star Wars, and Star Trek, give us a listen. You can find Fan Dummies podcast at fandummies.com or your favorite podcast app. I'll put all the links in the show notes below. Thank you. Welcome to True Crime by Indie Drop-In. Each week we feature an episode from the best independent creators. Hit subscribe for more great true crime content. If you would like to help Indie Drop-In support indie creators, you can buy us a coffee. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/indie drop-in or click the link in the show notes below. Today's episode is from Curly Conspiracies. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to subscribe and follow on social media. Enjoy the show.
Begin. Hi, everyone. This is Curly Conspiracies. I'm your host this week, Brooke Sasser, and I'm here with Holly Lauerman.
Hi, everyone.
Today we are talking about an assassination that broke the hearts of many around the world on December 8th, 1980. The assassination of John Lennon. John Lennon was a singer and songwriter that advocated peace and love to the millions. When the fateful day came, many were shocked, and the supposed killer, Mark Chapman, is still incarcerated to this day. What if John Lennon was ousted by the higher powers, though, and somebody else truly pulled the trigger? Today, we are going to dive into one man's research and quest to see if there was a deeper and darker conspiracy behind John Lennon's death. All right, guys, let's put on our tinfoil hats and dive in. John Lennon's death was mourned by millions, and by many articles online and researchers was considered to be amongst the most tragic assassinations in our history. Many of you probably already know some of this information, but just to give you a little tidbit on John Lennon, he was a former member of the Beatles, and after the Beatles disbanded, John Lennon went on to pursue a solo career as a singer and songwriter. In the later part of his life, he was married to Yoko Ono, and they were huge peace activists for their time as well as artists. At the time, the Vietnam War was happening as well as the Cold War, and people wanted the violence to end and there to be peace. John Lennon's assassination sparked a ton of conversation, debate, and of course, conspiracy. The media told the story of a man named Mark Chapman who pulled the trigger on December 8th, 1980 in New York, New York. Mark Chapman was living in Hawaii at the time and quit his job in October of 1980 and traveled to New York to assassinate John Lennon. But he couldn't get himself to do it on that trip. He came home and told his wife his plan and that his love for him made him stop and that he would change and become a better man. His wife gave an interview at a later time and said she believed him and that he had changed, and he swore he threw the gun into the ocean and all of that. So when he flew out again to New York in December, she didn't think much of it until the news flooded the TV networks of Lennon's death, and she immediately knew it was him.
So he just, out of a whim, decided that he was a better man and wasn't going to do it? There wasn't a reason why he just, changed, oh, I'm not going to do it anymore?
So he said he wasn't going to do it anymore out of love for his wife. There was a couple other reasons why he possibly assassinated John Lennon that we'll go into. But yeah, so the first time he went to New York, he said that he didn't because of his love for his wife, or that's what she claimed he said.
It's just kind of a weird, odd reason just to, out of the blue, think of, okay, and then I'm going to stop, throws his gun into the ocean, and then goes through with it later on. I feel like that's kind of suspicious.
Right? I don't know. I've never been in that place, but it doesn't seem like, I don't know, maybe a reason I would give Now, here's a little sidebar of information. His wife never divorced him. Mark Chapman is still in prison for this, and she still says she loves him and visits him after he killed John Lennon. Also, sources say that they get 44 hours a year to have conjugal visits where, and they eat pizza and watch Wheel of Fortune, which is like super odd.
I don't understand how some prisoners can get conjugal visits and some can't. He assassinated a huge celebrity that everybody knew and loved. It just seems kind of weird that he would be able to get that type of reward.
Right? And that, I don't know, I feel like she seemed shocked that he did it the second time. Or he went back to New York and actually went through with his plan. And then one, she wouldn't divorce him. And then two, she's still in love and has these conjugal visits with him. And I have no idea of prison rules, so I don't know the conjugal visit rules or how that works, but it seems kind of crazy. This seems like a really big crime, So
to go back to the wife, does she believe he actually did it?
Yes. So from what interviews I've watched and what sources say, she does believe that he did it. So, and maybe after hearing this conspiracy, that's kind of a conspiracy on its own. But right now, yes, she does believe that he did it.
Did he plead guilty?
He did.
Oh.
He said he did it.
Oh, this is interesting.
So, on December 8th, on the actual night of the assassination, Chapman waited until Yoko and John Lennon were coming home alone from the recording studio and shot him outside of their New York apartment. Chapman didn't run after John Lennon was shot, but instead was found waiting to be arrested, reading the book The Catcher in the Rye. Chapman later pleaded guilty. Chapman was given interviews since and apologized for his actions, but the court has denied all attempts at parole. Something interesting about all of this was that Chapman met Lennon 6 hours before the shooting to get an autograph of one of his albums. Chapman had apparently been stalking Lennon, trying to find a time to do the shooting, and came up to him and got an autograph with a group of fans. In later interviews, Chapman even describes liking John Lennon and thinking he was really nice and thoughtful after his encounter. During the autograph signing, there was a famous picture taken of the two, and I'll show this picture to you later, Holly, because this is where some of the mystery and conspiracy comes from.
That is so strange that you would admit that you, love this celebrity, would even, wait so long to get an autograph, and then you end up 6 hours later shooting them? I'm kind of confused on, the whole... things are not adding up for me.
Yeah, so apparently Mark Chapman was a fan of the Beatles and John Lennon. And I don't know how long they waited, but apparently there was a group of fans on the corner and he just waited with them. And then they all kind of went up together to get this autograph. And then that famous picture was kind of taken with the paparazzi and whatnot. But let me kind of explain to you the whys behind the assassination. So it stemmed from a couple of different reasons. So one reason being that John Lennon advocated for a life filled with peace, simplicity, and equality. But John Lennon's life was anything but equal. He lived a life of fame and lived in a luxury apartment in New York. Another reason some say is because while John Lennon was still with the Beatles, they were doing an interview. And essentially, John Lennon said that the Beatles at the time were more popular than Jesus. This didn't just make Mark David Chapman mad, but sparked a massive record burning among the world. He was also intrigued by The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And he wanted to be like the protagonist in the story. After all of this, though, the main reason Chapman says is simply because he was famous.
That's a very bizarre reason. So I kind of get how maybe some people saying they were more popular than Jesus, that would be a huge issue that they wouldn't like, especially if they're very religious. I could even see trying to bring peace if they really believe in war and that type of thing. But it just is kind of weird that he's famous. I mean, there's a ton of celebrities that are famous. Why John Lennon?
Right? And side note, I didn't look into this too much, but I did see some interviews and some other quotes that mentioned that Mark Chapman possibly had like a whole nother hit list of celebrities simply because they were famous. So I think the main root of this is this guy is like very mentally unstable and just needs a lot of help. And I think that's kind of why, but I agree with you. I mean, just saying that he's going to kill someone because they're famous just doesn't make sense.
That's insane that John Lennon could have just been the first of many to possibly be assassinated if he wasn't caught after this.
Right? Now, after the assassination, most people took this story as the truth, but conspiracy theorists began speculating whether John Lennon's assassination had other motives, and if Mark Chapman was truly the killer. Many believe, and I agree, that there are possible political motives behind John Lennon's death, especially considering that he was very open about his beliefs. He had a large following and was going against the wars happening at the time. Today, though, we're going to talk about one specific scenario, one created by a man named Stephen Lightfoot. Stephen believes that there were very specific people that were involved in John Lennon's death. Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and the most compelling, Stephen King.
Wow, so not just Stephen King, but all of them are involved?
Right? Yes. So Stephen Lightfoot gained attraction in what I believe to be the late 80s and 90s with this theory when he would stand in the streets of California and even had a van with news clippings and bold words printed on the side saying, "Stephen King shot John Lennon." Stephen Lightfoot would tell his evidence and theories to any who would listen. And since those days, and from what I can tell now, he has a website, which is very handy, and he upgraded his van to a much newer yellow one since. LennonMurderTruth.com is the name of the website with all the information if you want to check it out, and I will do my best to give you all the juicy details of this wild conspiracy theory. According to Stephen Lightfoot, there is tons of evidence that supports this theory, and he began to put this whole thing together with issues of the Times, Newsweek, U.S. News, and World Report issues that were printed before, during, and after the fateful night of December 8, 1980, which apparently had all of the government codes hidden amongst the text and even letters to the editors. Stephen Lightfoot describes some of the original evidence he found when he writes on his website, quote, "These codes include the killer's face and true identity, printed 3 and 2 months before the crime, replete with headlines describing the then yet to come crime scene. One great big Zippo lighter, perils of pyrokinesis." Pyrokinesis means fire and movement, and a man at night with a gun ablaze, crouched in a raincoat, looks a lot like a great big cigarette lighter. Subtle but dramatic codes, unquote.
So these magazine articles came from everywhere, and he just found codes in each of them that possibly predict or say that John Lennon is going to be assassinated and had connections to the crime scene.
Yes. And I have to say, this one isn't as compelling to me as other pieces of evidence. Like, I feel like that whole quote, like one great big Zippo lighter, perils of pyrokinesis. I mean, I didn't see the rest of the articles. I'm not really sure what the thought was behind it or why they would write that. And I'm not sure if out of context, it just sounds like it may relate to John Lennon's death or if there's a reason, but who knows? Definitely to me, not the most compelling.
Yeah, I would say this is a little bit of a stretch to try and like take all these codes. I feel like you're really trying to like connect things that aren't really supposed to be connected in this. So I'm having a hard time believing that part.
The next part is a little bit more compelling. So let's see what you think. So there's many other clues that Stephen Lightfoot gives and that are hidden in these articles. But one important one ties in what I mentioned earlier, that Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon are a part of this too. So Stephen Lightfoot says, quote, "These government codes include dramatic photos of just elected Ronald Reagan sitting next to Richard Nixon's book, The Real War in Time, and Newsweek issues released the day of the murder. In Time, the bold headline above Reagan reads, 'Who's in? Who's out?' And below, fitting together the pieces of a complicated jigsaw puzzle," unquote. Now, why is this a clue? It's because Richard Nixon was known to somewhat dislike John Lennon, and so much so he tried to get him deported in the 1970s. This was such a huge ordeal that the FBI investigated John Lennon's political activism for 5 years, and there are over 300 pages of FBI documents that were released.
I've heard of that before. So I was digging into some other conspiracies, and I didn't even think about how this possibly could be like tied to his assassination. But yeah, I've heard that the FBI hounded John Lennon.
Yeah, and so the deportation efforts and all the FBI surveillance was all approved by Richard Nixon, and many believe that this was because Nixon thought that John Lennon's peace movement could sway the presidential elections. Needless to say, though, John Lennon wouldn't be Richard Nixon's biggest problem when trying to stay in office. Not only this, but Brendan O'Connor from Black Bag describes the significance of the book Ronald Reagan is holding in this picture. The Real War by Richard Nixon, he says, quote, "According to Lightfoot, Nixon writes in The Real War, the prancing of the trendies, rock stars, beautiful people of New York who say war is bad and peace is good must be removed from the stage of public debate by whatever means of fly swatter are needed," unquote. And if this is true, I mean, it does seem like a somewhat damning quote.
What? So that's so crazy that the date of John Lennon's death, who's in, who's out, and then to have that quote in there, like all of this together tying in, I don't know. I think you're right. That is really compelling.
Yeah, this one is really suspicious and does make me think that maybe Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon were kind of in cahoots with, maybe trying to get John Lennon out, or like people who thought this way out. So just to give a quick summary, the first pieces of evidence and hidden clues were that they described the crime scene through symbolism and through the picture of Ronald Reagan holding Richard Nixon's book and the caption of "Who's in, who's out." And it somewhat proves that they were working together to get John Lennon, out, which seems to be the motive behind this conspiracy. Before we get into more evidence of this theory, we're going to take a short break. Now, back to the show. The next piece of evidence I'm going to give you guys ties Stephen King into this theory. Now, Stephen Lightfoot believes that the idea behind assassinating John Lennon was by Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. But who actually pulled the trigger? According to Lightfoot, Stephen King did. Mark Chapman was just a hired actor who looks strikingly similar to Stephen King. Remember earlier how I said that on December 8th, there's a photograph of supposedly Mark Chapman getting an autograph from John Lennon?
Yes.
Well, there's a lot of controversy whether that was Stephen King or Mark Chapman. And Holly, I'm going to show you the pictures of why some think this may be Stephen King, because the resemblance is really uncanny.
Wow, you were not kidding. If I saw these two guys face to face, I would literally think they're the same person or twins or something. They do look a lot alike.
Right? So in the first picture, you see like John Lennon and supposedly Mark Chapman getting an autograph. Right beside it, you see Stephen King's, headshot. And then below it, on the left side, you see Stephen King and then Mark Chapman's mugshot from the night that he shot John Lennon. And after I saw this, I was kind of on board with this theory, right?
Yeah, I can totally see how people would mistake the two.
I mean, it's crazy. You guys have to go check it out. It's going to be on our Instagram and website, and all that good stuff. So go look at it because it really is, it's just weird. Anyways, let's keep going because it kind of gets weirder. So Stephen Lightfoot apparently has letters from Stephen King about this whole conspiracy theory. There are 2 supposed letters from Stephen King to Stephen Lightfoot. The first one, supposedly signed by Stephen King, was written on September 20th, 1992, and says, quote, "I didn't kill John Lennon, and I think you know that as well as I do. Inside the wall of denial you've put up. Your interest in me is a way of alluring you to avoid dealing with your own mental and spiritual problems. Let it go, why don't you? And find new," and it's kind of like unintelligible here, "for your thoughts." And something else, "has a fascinating book about the man who really did kill John," unquote. Once receiving this letter, he remembered another letter he had received earlier, and it was signed by someone named Dennis C. Lee in 1984. He thinks the handwriting is the exact same as Stephen King's, and he thinks that this letter was also from Stephen King, just signed with a different pen name. The first letter reads, quote, "You haven't got the whole story yet, but since you will not cease your investigation, I thought I may as well clue you to phase 3, unquote. Stephen Lightfoot says that this letter he perceived as a threat because it was hand-delivered and was written on a book cover called Let Me Take You Down, which is a book about the dark mind of Mark Chapman.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I was about to ask, what does phase 3 mean? But yeah, I think he made it very clear after seeing what the book title was. And then the first letter that he wrote just seems very defensive. Like, I mean, I get somebody's like accusing you for murder, so maybe like, yeah, you would be a little defensive. But to write a letter like that and not just be like, oh, you're crazy, you know, like move on, whatever. But to write that letter and then possibly write this second letter, I don't know. I feel like he just seems overly defensive.
Yeah, and just to clarify, because it's a little confusing. So the first letter I read that was signed by Stephen King was sent years later. And so Stephen Lightfoot already had that first letter that was super defensive and that he perceived as a threat. He just didn't put the pieces together that it was possibly Stephen King until that first one I read, or the second letter, came in, because the handwriting was so similar and lots of other things about the letter were, I guess, similar. So he thinks that both letters were Stephen King. So the first letter was super defensive and like, you know, threat-ish. And then the second one came in and was like, you don't know everything, da-da-da-da-da. So, but even the fact that Stephen King would like take the time, if he did do this, take the time to write to Stephen Lightfoot seems, I don't know, really odd, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier. Yeah, for him to not just dismiss the idea and keep going, but to actually go out of his way to write these letters, or even like have that one actually personally handed to him. I mean, that took some planning.
Yeah. And so he has the pictures of the letters side by side, and I will say they're kind of similar handwriting if you want to take a quick look at them, Holly. We will, of course, have all the pictures on our Instagram and website too, and I will say the handwriting was so hard to read on both letters. It took me a while to decipher them, so I apologize if I'm not 100% accurate. Also, the first letter I talked about that was actually signed by Stephen King was the one written on the right side, Holly, and the one that was years before that was on that book cover and was possibly a threat is on the left side.
The handwriting does seem similar, but I can totally see how it would take you a long time to decipher this, because I'm looking at it and I can't read it. So I would have to really like blow it up to be able to like see what it's even saying. But yeah, the handwriting is very similar. It's in cursive, or like a slight cursive, because some letters aren't in cursive and some are in both of them. And the one that says phase 3, it says it's signed DC. Do you ever know what it's signed at the very bottom? I kind of wonder if that is like a symbol or an acronym for something that we don't know.
Yeah, so Stephen Lightfoot says that the name stands for Dennis C. Lee. And he's curious as to whether this was like a pen name that Stephen King used. I looked it up. Stephen King uses a couple of different pen names, but Dennis C. Lee is not a popular one. So it's not one that's known if it is. And I think he gets Dennis C. Lee because on that like weird title page thing that it's written on, I think it says by Dennis C. Lee, so I think he just assumes it's DCL, Dennis C. Lee.
And if it's not a pen name for him, is there anybody else that could have possibly written the letter?
Good question. I haven't heard. So I did have to be just a little bit extra, and I also searched for a picture of Stephen King's autograph, though. And I want you to take a look at the signatures. So in the bottom right-hand corner of the letters, there's the actual signature of Stephen King. And then below, I put a picture of the autograph of Stephen King. And what do you think? Do you think they're similar?
So I'm looking at the signature right now, and I do see some similarities. I do see a couple of differences, like the G, and then the G and the DC Lee letter. And so I can kind of see they look a little bit different. So there's a couple of different letters in them, but I mean, majority of the letters look very similar to the letter by DC Lee within his signature. But of course, I feel like when somebody writes their signature, it's usually a little different than how you normally write because you've practiced your signature for so long and you add some little flair to your signature, whereas in your normal writing, you don't do that. So it could just be something like that, but I don't know. So I don't know if I'm fully convinced looking at the signature, but I will say the two letters beside each other do look very similar, like pretty much the same. So even though maybe the signature doesn't look like it, I feel like the letters do. So
yeah, I agree. There's definitely some differences in the signature and his, I guess, typical autograph. But like you said, I mean, even when I sign my name, I feel like it looks different every single time I write it, and definitely depending on how fast I write it or how much time I take. So I feel like it doesn't totally discredit it. And I definitely think that this is a really interesting piece of evidence. I don't know. I definitely think if this really is Stephen King's handwriting, maybe it was Stephen King. I don't know.
Yeah, if it's really Stephen King's handwriting, I think that would definitely put me on board with this theory.
Stephen Lightfoot continues on saying that certain excerpts from Stephen King's books, such as Salem's Lot and The Dead Zone, are confessing to the planning of John Lennon's death, since the books were written before the murder. I will be honest, the excerpts are really long and we won't have time to read them all. But if you're interested, it is all on Stephen Lightfoot's website, LennonMurderTruth.com. As far as evidence goes, this seems to be the extent of Stephen Lightfoot's. By the way, he also updates his page with new information, and I didn't see too much to report on here, except he does believe that the FBI and government is after him and trying to kill him. Specifically, he believes that they're trying to cover up his death in a car accident. This part of the website is almost written in a blog-style format and was most recently updated not too long ago on October 8th, 2020.
Wow, that's just a couple of days ago. I'm surprised it's been that recent since he's posted.
Yeah, me too. And I will say, I hope this is not true in any way, and I wish nothing bad for Stephen Lightfoot, and hope that we don't read about this on the news anytime soon. If you do go and read about his accounts online, I will warn you, he does seem very angry in some of his letters and blogs, and in the most recent one, he is trying to get people to come and support this cause, which yes, he is still doing rallies and actively advocating this theory, but he is name calling the general public quite a bit, and he goes as far to blame COVID on our lack of activism and a possible asteroid coming to doom us. And some of the other letters do say some triggering things, so please be aware of this and know that we don't support fear-mongering or hate towards anyone here at Curly Conspiracies. Back to the story, though. So the remaining question I had is, why Stephen King? I feel like Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon kind of make sense. I could see why they would be involved. But why Stephen King? That part of the conspiracy is still very blurry. But my thought is maybe he did it for fame or maybe even protection. I mean, we've talked about before that if the Illuminati is real and some of these secret societies, then some of these reports of celebrities we know doing heinous things may be true.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask earlier, and then I forgot it, was why Stephen King? And especially because they have the FBI and they have all these like trained people that probably would be trained for an assassination. Why would they make Stephen King do it? It seems kind of like strange with an author assassinating another celebrity.
Right? And I feel like that's kind of the hole in the story. Like, that doesn't make sense. I mean, in some ways, I guess I could see it if Stephen King was trying to, get more famous or more money or something. But I guess I just don't understand what would make Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon choose Stephen King, I guess is my thought. But really crazy, though. Before we discuss our thoughts, though, I want to leave you with one more thing. The next quote by Stephen King has caused some interesting debate, and some believe that Stephen King admitted his guilt in an interview with Playboy magazine on his thoughts of the genre of horror. Quote, "The mythic horror movie, like The Sick Joke, has a dirty job to do. It deliberately appeals to all that is worst in us. It is morbidly unchained, our most base instincts let free, our nastiest fantasies realized, and it all happens, fittingly enough, in the dark. For those reasons, good liberals often shy away from horror films. For myself, I like to see the most aggressive of them, Dawn of the Dead, for instance, as lifting the trapdoor in the civilized forebrain and throwing a basket of raw meat to the hungry alligators swimming around in that subterranean river beneath. Why bother? Because it keeps from getting out, man. It keeps them down there and me up here. It was Lennon and McCartney who said that all you need is love, and I would agree with that, as long as you keep the gators fed." Unquote.
Oh my goodness. He did not quote John Lennon.
Right? All right, Holly, what are your thoughts?
Ooh, that last quote, I'm still, I have goosebumps from that last quote. That is just so creepy. Why would you say that when... So, okay, real quick. Did he say that after all these theories came out?
Good question. From my research, I believe he did.
What? So it does seem like he's kind of admitting to it there. Oh my gosh. And almost kind of throwing it out there and just being like, hey, I got away with it almost. And almost threatening others who try to do the same thing that John Lennon did.
Yeah. That quote when I read it was so bizarre. And the pictures, I still can't get over the pictures of John Lennon and Mark Chapman and how similar they are. It's so weird. This whole conspiracy is so weird.
I want to be so skeptical of this. Going into it, I was like, okay, nope, already. I wasn't trying to be biased. I was trying to keep an open mind, but I was like, no, come on. But gosh, this evidence is really insane. And I just can't get past the photographs and then the letters and then his quote at the end. I don't know. It's a lot of coincidences going back. I keep wanting to dismiss these pieces of evidence, the letters. Maybe he's just being defensive because, people are accusing him of murder. So of course you're going to be defensive. I mean, I don't know if most people go as far as possibly threatening the person who is accusing you, but I mean, I could definitely see people being upset and wanting to write to them saying, no, like, you don't understand the whole story, blah, 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 blah. I could kind of get behind that. The pictures, I don't know. They just look really alike. I don't know how you could get two people to look so alike. And maybe that's why they picked Stephen King. But why would they pick Mark Chapman? I don't know. It just seems kind of weird. And then to go back to that quote, though, there's like nothing I can really explain that quote away. He said it after he already knew that he was being accused of murder of John Lennon. And he would say that. Like, it almost seems like he's kind of throwing it in our faces. I don't know. I have a hard time. I want to be skeptical of it, but these pieces of evidence are really compelling. I don't know. I can't get past them.
Right? And really quick, I want to go back to Mark Chapman's wife, because let's just say this is a conspiracy and Mark Chapman was like some paid actor, right? And Stephen King really was the killer. I mean, it would kind of make sense why Mark Chapman's wife would still be with him after she was concerned after the first time and still sees him and says she loves him and all of that stuff. Like, I feel like it would kind of explain that piece too. If Mark Chapman didn't truly do this and was some type of pawn in this larger game, it would kind of make sense why, you know, that part of the story we mentioned earlier makes sense and isn't so weird after all.
That's a good point. And then when you think about how Mark at first was like, no, I'm not going to do it for the love of my wife, but then all of a sudden to turn around not too long after and do it anyway. I kind of wonder if the government kind of knew that he was going to do this. Like, do you know if he posted it or spread it or had journals or something written that he was planning on assassinating John Lennon? And then they were like, contacted him and be like, hey, actually, we got a plan for you. We can use you. I mean, I don't know if that is even possible, but that would kind of explain his all of a sudden 180 turning around and actually, you know, going through with this plan.
Good question. And I mean, from my understanding, he's been this like Catcher the Rye fan for a while and, you know, has been a Beatles fan, and maybe like a Big Brother was watching and like figured it out that like maybe he would be a good player in this larger game or whatever this is. But I think maybe some of the little things in his past, like the Catcher the Rye story and being a Beatles fan and maybe having other similar thoughts. I know that some actions in his past has made him be deemed maybe mentally unstable, and certain things he's possibly done prior to all of this. So I want to say that maybe that's why he was kind of picked, was because of all these different events that kind of led up to this bigger thing going on.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I definitely could see that. Yeah. I'm having a hard time dismissing all of this. I don't want to be fully in like, yes, this is this happened, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like I am about like 75% on board with this theory. Like, if there was a little more, I'd be 100%, but I feel like I'm leaning towards the side of Stephen King actually did. That's crazy. I still am like laughing at the idea that I believe this. Like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of like, what? What am I thinking? But gosh, I can't get it out of my head. Like, I really think that this has a lot of credibility here.
Right? It feels silly to say, but it really does feel like, you know, it's a possibility. And I will say, whether Stephen King did it or not, I do think that there's something probably suspicious behind John Lennon's death. And I think that, you know, the whole Richard Nixon trying to get him, you know, deported, and then the whole FBI investigation, you know, like all of that, I definitely feel goes to show that probably John Lennon's death and his peace, you know, his efforts for peace and all of that makes him a target. Like, I think it's an easy jump to go to that his death was suspicious. Now, Stephen King, I mean, there's definitely more good evidence here than I would ever care to admit. But I don't know. Maybe he did do it. I don't know.
Yeah, and again, to kind of go back to the government, I mean, around this time, they were really involved with having targets in the civil rights movement. I mean, again, we talked about in the Kentucky Derby episode, in the COINTELPRO project, where they were targeting people that were for the civil rights movement and even possibly committed one actress to committing suicide. I mean, because they were stalking her so much. So we know that they had several other targets during that time. So, I mean, it wouldn't fully surprise me that they did end up killing a couple of them. There's even a whole conspiracy about Martin Luther King Jr. being assassinated by not the person who we originally think from the history books. That's a whole conspiracy. So who knows, really?
Yeah, I agree. Thank you all for tuning in for this week's episode, and let us know what you think. Is Stephen King a murderer and truly committed the assassination of John Lennon? Or did Mark Chapman, the deranged Catcher in the Rye fan, really pull the trigger on that fateful day? Let us know your thoughts, and we will see you next week for Theory Thursday. Thank you guys for tuning in today and diving into this mystery with us. Go check out our website if you want to see our sources, pictures, and other information from this episode at curlyconspiracies.com. You can also follow us on Instagram and search for the handle Curly Conspiracies. This podcast is brought to you by May Gua Ren Productions, Brooke Sasser as a scriptwriter, host, and researcher, Holly Lauerman as a scriptwriter, host, and researcher, Chris Sasser Photography.
Thanks
and
again for
graphic
listening
design,
to True Crime by Indie Drop-In. If you would like your show featured, reach out to us at Indie Drop-In on all social media or go to indiedropin.com. See you next time.